Was the teenage Princess Elizabeth sexually abused by her stepfather, Thomas Seymour? This is a rumour that has spread since she was 13 years old. Months before his marriage to Katherine Parr, Henry VIII's widow, it is alleged that Thomas Seymour asked the 13-year-old Princess Elizabeth to marry him. Seymour was her stepmother Jane Seymour's brother, and the husband of another stepmother, Katherine Parr. Elizabeth I, as one of England's longest reigning monarchs, was surrounded by enemies who tried to sabotage her crown and her life until the day she died. The evidence that backs up this allegation comes from testimonies from Elizabeth's servants during the Privy Council investigation into whether Seymour tried to marry Elizabeth without their consent. Thomas Seymour's proposal came in the form of a letter sent and received in February 1547, shortly after her father's death. It is alleged that his letter was sent out of panic to gain power over his brother Edward Seymour, who had recently been appointed Lord Protector. Thomas Seymour was 38 years old at the time, and this was highly inappropriate to propose to a 13-year-old girl who was far out of his league. Elizabeth, at only 13 years old, responded to his advances by rejecting his proposal via letter, stating that she was too young and that she was in a state of mourning over her father. Thomas took the next best thing to remain close to Elizabeth, and he married Katherine Parr, Henry VIII's widow. Katherine had loved him way before her marriage to the late king, but his motives seemed to differ to hers, mostly lusting for power. Elizabeth was living with Katherine, and so when she married Thomas, he awkwardly moved in to be with his new wife. This is where he would make his advances. He would visit her in the early morning within days of arriving at her home, according to Elizabeth's servants. He began to harass the princess, arriving early into her room before she was dressed, joining her in her bed and striking her on the bottom. Elizabeth was clearly uncomfortable and tried to rise earlier and earlier from bed to avoid his advances, because once she was dressed he would cut his harassment short and leave. Kat Ashley, one of her servants, began to become concerned of his harassments, and so she began to keep Elizabeth company in her bedroom to try to deter him. But he continued his behaviour. Kat Ashley even tried to deter him physically and verbally, shouting, "Go away for shame," but he brushed it off as meaning no evil. And Katherine Parr also joined in when Elizabeth turned 14. The pair would tickle her in bed and wrestle with her in the garden, and Thomas cut her gown into hundreds of pieces while his wife held her down. In what capacity she held her down is unknown. Were they playing around, or was there something more sinister going on here? Katherine appeared to grow increasingly jealous of Elizabeth, and asked her servant to spy on her to check her behaviour around Thomas. Eventually, the married couple moved out into his London home, and Elizabeth stayed behind for a while. She did join the couple later on in the spring of 1548, and his visits to her bedroom started again. He could not be deterred even when Kat Ashley berated him for visiting a maiden's chamber while she was undressed. Katherine asked Elizabeth to arrange a messenger to send her letters to Seymour, and Elizabeth wrote on the front of the letter, "Thou touch me not." She then scribbled this out and replaced it with, "Let him not touch me." This proves that she was too shy, perhaps due to her age, to combat his advances herself, but that his actions were unwanted. Her servant did say that Elizabeth would blush when Seymour was spoken of, proving that she either had a soft spot for Seymour or was shameful. Katherine caught the pair embracing each other alone, and fraught with jealousy, she was furious and ordered Elizabeth to leave her home. The next day, Elizabeth went to live with her servant's sister, Sir Anthony and Joan Denny, in Hertfordshire. It is unknown whether Katherine sent her away to protect her, as she was maturing and she was at greater risk of his advances, and with her being pregnant, she would not be able to protect her when she goes into confinement. Elizabeth came down with an illness where she suffered from irregular periods, migraines and digestive problems, and this is where a rumour spread that she could have been pregnant. However, she was probably just stressed after being abandoned by her stepmother and harassed by her stepfather. Catherine and Elizabeth would exchange letters that proved they had reconciled after the events in June, but they were never to see each other in person again, as Catherine tragically died a week after giving birth in September. The following year, in January 1549, Thomas was arrested. He was accused of kidnapping the king and trying to marry Elizabeth behind the council's back. Elizabeth was also under accusation, but she was able to escape blame as her servants testified for her. Thomas was beheaded for his actions at Tower Hill on the 20th of March. This harassment in her childhood will have impacted the Queen as an adult, and perhaps this is why she refused to marry. Seymour's lust for power would also plague her perception of all men. While they had one eye on her, they also had an eye on her throne, and she would not give that up. Please comment, like and subscribe if you wish for more stories, and leave your suggestions below and I will endeavour to cover them.